Hello. About 50 years ago, I got acquainted with the first edition of this book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. This is the edition that was put out in the 1990s, a reissue and re-editing of the two original books, volumes 1 and 2 in the 70s. A third edition has been put out now by Josh and his son Sean, who you will find all over the place on YouTube if you look for apologetics, Sean McDowell. I want to read you a portion of this because I can advocate the merit of this book. Even when 50 years ago, when I first became acquainted with it, I was a loyal Jehovah's Witness, but I was impressed even then by the thoroughness of Josh McDowell's research and all the books that he had in his bibliography in every chapter of the book. This one is updated, of course, with a lot of new information, but the basic stance of it hasn't changed. If you want a book that will challenge ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have, in disillusionment with the organization, fallen out of faith altogether, this is probably my first choice. Get them this book or the latest edition of it with Sean's help, published in the last decade or so, and don't let them not read it, and keep following it up after you buy it for them, maybe as a gift. But follow it up by asking them frequently, have they dealt with the various chapters in this book? For instance, the one I want to focus on right now, which is the evidence for the resurrection. Was it a hoax or is it history? And there's so much in here that cannot be gainsaid. If you're an intelligent, sincere human being, you'll have to deal with the evidence, and that's why that's the potency of the title, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, namely that will this evidence pass muster in a court of law? And we have a few experts consulted in this particular chapter, one of whom is Simon Greenleaf. There is no greater name in American jurisprudence than Simon Greenleaf, who lived from 1783 to 1853. He was the famous Royal Professor of Law at Harvard University and succeeded Justice Joseph Story as the Dane Professor of Law in the same university upon Story's death in 1846. H.W.H. Nott says of this great authority in jurisprudence, "To the efforts of Story and Greenleaf is to be ascribed the rise of the Harvard Law School to its eminent position among the legal schools of the United States." Greenleaf produced a famous work entitled A Treatise on the Law of Evidence that is still considered the greatest single authority on evidence in the entire literature of legal procedure. In 1846, while still professor of law at Harvard, Greenleaf wrote a volume entitled An Examination of the Testimony of the Four Evangelists by the Rules of Evidence Administered in the Courts of Justice. In this classic work, the author examines the value of the testimony of the apostles to the resurrection of Christ. The following are this brilliant jurist's critical observations, and now this is one long quote from Greenleaf. The great truths which the apostles declared were that Christ had risen from the dead, and that only through repentance from sin and faith in him could men hope for salvation. This doctrine they asserted with one voice, everywhere, not only under the greatest discouragements, but in the face of the most appalling errors that can be presented to the mind of men. Their master had recently perished as a malefactor by the sentence of a public tribunal. His religion sought to overthrow the religions of the whole world. The laws of every country were against the teachings of his disciples. The interests and passions of all the rulers and great men in the world were against them. The fashion of the world was against them. Propagating this new faith, even in the most inoffensive and peaceful manner, they could expect nothing but contempt, opposition, revilings, bitter persecutions, stripes, imprisonments, torments, and cruel deaths. Yet this faith they zealously did propagate, and all these miseries they endured undismayed, nay, rejoicing. As one after another was put to a miserable death, the survivors only prosecuted their work with increased vigor and resolution. The annals of military warfare afford scarcely an example of the like heroic constancy, patience, and unblenching courage. They had every possible motive to review carefully the grounds of their faith and the evidences of the great facts and truths which they asserted, and these motives were pressed upon their attention with the most melancholy and terrific frequency. It was therefore impossible that they could have persisted in affirming the truths they have narrated had not Jesus actually risen from the dead, and had they not known this fact as certainly as they knew any other fact. If it were morally possible for them to have been deceived in this matter, every human motive operated to lead them to discover and avow their error. To have persisted in so gross a falsehood, after it was known to them, was not only to encounter, for life, all the evils which man could inflict from without, but to endure also the pangs of inward and conscious guilt, with no hope of future peace, no testimony of a good conscience, no expectation of honor or esteem among men, no hope of happiness in this life or in the world to come. Such conduct in the apostles would moreover have been utterly irreconcilable with the fact that they possessed the ordinary constitution of our common nature, yet their lives do show them to have been men like all others of our race, swayed by the same motives, animated by the same hopes, affected by the same joys, subdued by the same sorrows, agitated by the same fears, and subject to the same passions, temptations, and infirmity as ourselves. And their writings show them to have been men of vigorous understandings. If then their testimony was not true, there was no possible motive for its fabrication. Now, he wrote an entire booklet on this, which you can easily obtain PDF form online if you want to look at the entire pamphlet. But the point is, Greenleaf knew their laws of evidence and knew that by the standards of legal procedure in the United States of his day and till today, those laws would uphold the truth of the narrative of the Gospels. I wanted to therefore put this book in our basic library, not only for Christians, but basic library for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in particular. This is a handy way, a formidable way to deal with any doubts or any questions, really. All the more common questions are dealt with within the bounds of this book. And there's lots more where this came from, because it has an extensive bibliography at the end, by the way. I'll put in a link, too, to William Ramsay, the Oxford scholar archaeologist, who was a doubter when he began his expeditions in Asia Minor, now called Turkey. But what he found in the historical evidence under his archaeological eye, matching the evidence available to him in the Gospel of Luke and the subsequent, the sequel to the Gospel of Luke, which is the book of Acts, of course. What he found in those books convinced him that Luke was not only a worthy witness, but he was also a great historian. So check out this video on William Ramsay, who was later knighted for his contribution to archaeology. And also I'll put on our exJW's playlist, the testimony of many folks who've come forth from the Watchtower and maintained or even built their faith to a new level. See you next time.